Welcome. Today, CitiBike at age 3 weeks. Riders have already taken the 6,000 blue bikes on more than 250,000 trips, logging 750,000 miles. Sounds impressive, but is it? What's needed to expand the system into true alternative transportation for all neighborhoods in the region? There's much to learn from Copenhagen. Also today, in our Public Intellectual segment, where we highlight new research that changes our thinking and public policy, women breadwinners. Scholars react to a study that shows women are now the primary or sole breadwinners in 4 out of 10 households in the U.S. with kids. And we get a glimpse of the ongoing Human Rights Watch Film Festival, which includes documentaries that range from child marriage in Senegal to a Texas man convicted of killing his wife. He didn't. First, though, the newest form of public transit in New York, CitiBike. How's it going, and what's its potential? To begin our evaluation, let's hear some reviews.
Is this your first time renting?
This is my second time, actually. Yeah, I ordered the key, but I haven't received the key yet. I'm taking their sweet time with that.
Right, the magic number to get in.
Exactly. Back.
So what was your experience the first time?
I had a fantastic time. I was moving into a new apartment, and I dropped the bag off and took the bike back from my new apartment to the old apartment. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thinking of getting a helmet, though. That seems to make the most sense.
Did you bring the bike back to the same place you took it out from?
I did not. I dropped it off at a different location.
Both in Manhattan?
Both in Manhattan, yep.
So it's convenient for you?
Very convenient. Very much so.
Do you own a car?
I do own a car, yes. But I'd rather use this than drive it.
So you've rented before?
Yeah, I signed up for the year pass. I haven't gotten the mail,
Yeah,
but
me either.
I rented last night.
Oh, cool. And what's been your experience?
It's great. I run the 4 train stopped at Brooklyn Bridge. I live in downtown Brooklyn. So 12:30 at night, in the rain, I jumped on a bike and I rode across the bridge.
And then you left it where?
I left it near my house, Henry and Atlantic.
Easy.
Yeah.
Now, do you do it sort of at random, or do you use the some kind of app or go on the web to figure out if there are any spaces to drop it or places to pick up a bike?
Yeah, random. Yeah, I work in Midtown, so I had a meeting up here, so I figured that last night I was calculating if I had the 24-hour pass, I could use it 3-4 times. It'd be perfect.
Now, what's the problem?
The code's not working.
And yours either?
Yeah, I had the same problem at the last station, too. So I had to walk through here. Which kind of bums it out. The second time it's happened today.
So they're glitches?
They're glitches.
First time on the bike?
Yes, it is.
Where are you from?
Las Vegas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. And where are you headed?
Central Park.
Ah, yes. And how long do you think you'll hold on to it?
Probably about 2 hours, maybe 3 hours.
Yeah. Did you know about the bike share thing when you came to New York?
I had read something about it before I came here, but I sort of stumbled across it yesterday.
Well, good luck in New York traffic. Are you scared, worried?
A little bit. Hopefully we're going the right way.
Are you an experienced bike rider too?
Yeah.
Know what you're doing?
Yeah.
How do you feel about driving in New York traffic?
You know, I have my own bicycle, so I've kind of gotten used to it.
So why aren't you using your own bike?
Because it's just more convenient. You don't have to worry about, locking it up when you go and do something. You don't have to worry about getting up and down the escalators, the elevators. And, I keep my own bike for longer distance because this thing's only limited to 30 minutes per go. But, for hopping around town and for commuting, it's great.
Wonderful. And you always seem to find a slot in a station near where you want to go?
So far, but this is only my 5th ride, so we'll see what happens. But the app seems to be pretty good in enabling you to identify where there's slots and bikes are available. I haven't tested to see how accurate it is, but at least it suggests that you can use the app to find out if there's anything available. The only problem I've had so far is that I tried to pick up a bike last night at VC Street, and the system was down or something, and none of the bikes were available. But I walked 5 minutes to another slot and got a bike straight away.
CitiBikers talking with producer Marty Goldenson. Can this high-tech system of 6,000 blue bikes really become a significant third form of public transportation for New York City? What can we learn from cities worldwide about how to improve and expand it regionally? And will an upcoming bike hackathon lead to killer apps to make the system even more user-friendly. Joining us via Skype from Arlington, Virginia, arguably the world's expert in bike sharing, MetroBike founder Paul DeMeo. DeMeo's been studying pedal-powered transit for the past 2 decades and was a key advocate for bike sharing in the Washington, D.C. bike sharing system, previously the largest in the U.S. And with us as well, Frank Hebert, director at Open Plans, a group using technology to foster a more inclusive government. He's been working to make sure the New York and D.C. bike systems get off on the right pedal. Welcome.
Thank you.
Frank, let me start with you. How's it going?
Great. I rode up here today on CitiBike, and it's a beautiful day for it. And I think, you mentioned the stats earlier. I think it's amazing how many trips have been taken and how many miles people have covered.
How about all those glitches that some of the people in the video were reporting and that we've seen a lot of reporting about in the media?
Yeah, it seems like in the early days there were a few glitches. I think the last couple of days, just reading Twitter and looking at Facebook, it seems like there's less of an issue, and it is a pretty big system. So I think once it beds in, we'll see whether there's anything really serious there.
Paul, give us a little background about yourself. How'd you get so into bike sharing as something to study and try to perpetrate over 20 years?
Well, actually, it happened by accident. I was working as a computer consultant back in college at the University of Virginia, and I was Yahooing before Google was around, and came across a couple images of Copenhagen's CitiBike program. Just a white page with some text on it and a couple photographs, and that got me interested to do a study abroad semester in Copenhagen and learn about their CitiBike program up close and in person.
I want to get a couple of graphics up on the screen that each of you will be able to talk us through a little bit that I think will tell some of this story. The first thing, Frank, CitiBike miles since launch, which was just on Memorial Day, so this story is pretty clearly told.
Yeah, pretty straightforward, yep.
Straight line, straight up, no dropping off yet as of June 12th. In fact, if anything, the slope is getting even a little bit steeper.
Yeah, and this is all coming from data that the system is producing. So lots of people can be taking this data and doing really interesting things. This is a software engineer who lives in New York who has a whole blog of graphs about how the system is performing.
Because every time you take a bike or return a bike,
right,
it's connected to a software
yep,
brain,
so
right?
they know where they are. And they actually have a GPS tracker on every bike. So we're going to get amazing, rich data about how people move around the city.
All right, let's take a look at another one. This is showing us the availability of bikes. This is basically a map of the system and where these docking stations are, right?
Correct. And yeah, so the larger dots have more bikes available, and I think the brighter colors, or the larger docks have more spaces, and the brighter colors have more bikes at those docks right now.
So blue means no bikes.
Blue means, yeah, fewer bikes, that's right.
Yeah, so this is a snapshot in time, and if you go onto the app, you'll see different colors at any moment.
That's right, and you'll see, I think that's a 37%. So right now there are 3,000 bikes in docks, so there's a lot of bikes that are out on the road.
Wow, so that means at one moment, 2/3 of the bikes practically might be out on the street, representing 6,000 bikes?
And it's amazing.
Or 4,000. How many bikes are there altogether again?
6,000.
6,000. So maybe 3,500, 4,000 bikes are out at once.
Right, right.
It's incredible.
Right, so tens of thousands of trips.
So Paul, where does this fit in globally? How does the existence of this new CitiBike program in New York change the landscape or fit into the landscape globally?
Well, it's huge. It's North America's largest bike sharing service now. As you mentioned before, Capital Bike Share formerly was the largest, and it's New York City. It's our financial capital. It is the largest city in the U.S., and because of that, there are more eyes, more ears listening to this, watching this, seeing it happen. And if it can happen in New York, it can happen everywhere.
And you have an interesting map. I think this is the next one that we can put up, showing the bike share systems around the world, and one showing the bike share systems around the country. So, wow, look at Europe, look at Spain and France.
There are, bike sharing started in Europe. It started in Amsterdam in 1965 with the White Bike program. And It was a first generation type program where bikes were simply painted white, left on the street corner, and used from corner to corner wherever people needed to go. And it's gone crazy throughout Europe, North America, Asia. Now there's a service in Africa as well, and many around South America. So it's really going worldwide.
And in case we think we're so ahead of the curve here in New York, you can look at the same graphic and see, let's put up that world map again, and you can see up and down the Mississippi River, it looks like. Look at the United States there, folks, and right smack in the middle of the country, running north-south. I assume those are the Mississippi River towns. But Paul, familiar with that? So they've been doing this in the Midwest for a while.
Yeah, actually, I believe in Omaha, or excuse me, Kansas. I'm drawing a blank. But yeah, there has been bike sharing all throughout the U.S. It started actually, on Washington D.C. region with Smart Bike D.C., which was back in 2008, and then the second and third programs were over in Denver and Minneapolis, and then D.C. Arlington being the fourth program with the reincarnation of its bike sharing. And it's really just growing everywhere. It's a good idea. It doesn't meet the need for all trips, but it does meet the need for many trips, and that's why it's been so successful.
Now, Frank, this next graphic asks the question, what areas benefit the most from Citibank? And it looks like, I guess that's the west side in the business district.
Yeah,
from
and then
CitiBike, forgive me, and also the Lower East Side.
So this is an amazing analysis, taking the locations of all the docks and working out how far you can travel from each dock, done by another software engineer who lives in the city called Alistair Coote. And what he's identified are these areas where, so red is a 20-minute travel time improvement. So what we're seeing here is if you're going from Union Square to particularly the Lower East Side and also on beyond, sort of out beyond Penn Station, how much quicker you can get there with CitiBike than you would have been able to get there using the subway or a bus and then walking.
And is that the Williamsburg Bridge, the northernmost of the three bridges where we're seeing the concentration on the Brooklyn side?
That's right, yes. So you can come over the bridge from Union Square, and I guess it's just that much quicker than taking the L and walking down.
Paul, do we have experience from Europe as to how to make it more democratically distributed? I think there's an assumption here, and I don't know if it's statistically proving to be true yet, but this is mostly going to be a relatively elite program for people who are already, more or less middle class and have some choices. Is that a problem around the world? Is there a solution around the world?
Just like any other mode of transit, bus service, rail service, there needs to be equity amongst the distribution of stations. So there need to be stations located within all neighborhoods. Of course, regardless of socioeconomic location, they needs to be accessible to people of all different backgrounds. And one thing that individual bike sharing service providers are working on are providing bike education classes, teaching people how to ride who may have never had this opportunity before. Also providing classes in Spanish, other languages as well. So by providing a quarterly billing option, as we do here with Capital Bike Share, or also we have a Bank on DC program, which for lower income individuals, this will get people who are unbanked, get them banked, and then also give a $25 discount on the $75 annual membership, while at the same time giving them access to a debit card. So, there was a lot of opportunity here to work with other partners, whether financial partners and whatnot, health partners, to make this really a game changer in terms of transport.
Right. Yeah, let's hope we can do that more and more and more across the socioeconomic spectrum. Frank, tell us about this hackathon that's coming up on June 26th. Why do we need more apps? We have a beautiful CitiBike app that shows where all the docking stations are, how many bikes are available.
So I think that's just the beginning. So we're going to have all this amazing data from the bikes moving around the city. You touched on this sort of issues of access and who has information about the bikes and where they are. So there's this amazing opportunity to use all this data to really change how we think about planning the city. So anyone who has access to the data and very simple tools that they could run, on your iPad or on a laptop, can do analysis, can make maps, can start to see how the city is functioning in a way that just a few years ago wasn't possible. Only the sort of elite analysts could do that. So this is data that we're all going to be producing because we're all going to be biking around, and we're also all have the opportunity to turn it into sort of insights about how the city works.
And this GPS data, who knows where we're biking? Does the NSA watch our bike trips, or who's this?
That's a question that you'll have to ask the bike share operator, but I'm sure they'll take precautions with what they release.
But how is it actually useful?
Oh, so I mean, I guess the best precedent is to look at how the cities use taxi data. So there are GPS in the cabs, and they use this to understand how traffic moves around Midtown. So they know very detailed traffic movement data and very detailed information about movement to and from the airports that comes from looking at these GPS traces. And so we'll be able to understand, where are cyclists riding, where are they not riding, why do people choose the routes they choose without having to go out onto the street.
Which can help not only with bike docking station locations, but all kinds of transportation
Absolutely.
planning.
It'll be incredibly powerful.
Well, it's an exciting implementation.
Yeah, it's thrilling.
Just days into it. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And Paul, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And in a moment, moms as primary breadwinners, the good and bad news. Time now for our public intellectual segment, where we look at new research that can change our thinking and public policy. According to a new Pew Research Center analysis of data from the U.S. Census Bureau, a record 40% of all American households with children under the age of 18 include mothers who are either the sole or primary source of income for the family. That's a near four-fold increase since 1960. The study says that these breadwinner moms comprise two very different groups. 5 million are married mothers who have a higher income than their husbands, but 8 million are single mothers. The income gap between them is cavernous. So what does the Pew study tell us about the new role of women in our society, about poverty, the economic downturn, the role of men, and what public policies are needed in light of this enormous change in our culture? Joining us, Carmela T.M. Marone, founder of the Women in Work program at Queens College, which helps women who need a second chance in life. Anthropologist Ida Susser at Hunter College and the CUNY Grad Center has written Norman Street, Poverty and Politics in an Urban Neighborhood. And via Skype from Princeton, Professor Amani Perry from the Center for African American Studies. Welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you.
There's something new here. There's something that's changed over the 40, 50-year period that they measured, right?
So what this tells us, even though I don't like the term primary breadwinners, because it seems to me it's confusing us, we're talking about wealthier women who are in dual households where the husband maybe earns a few thousand less than the wife. And then we're comparing them with what they call single women, where there's no man there, and they're earning like a median income of $23,000. So we're not really talking about the same people, but also we've learned that the women earning, I think, $23,000, the number of those what they call single households has gone up threefold since 1967, 3 times as many, which means that poor households with children has multiplied by 3 times. That is not something cheerful. And it's not the way that the thing is being written. It doesn't quite give you that sense. And the other thing is that the women who are highly educated and maybe in some cases earning more than their husbands, it's still that in those dual households, 75% of the households, the men are earning more than the women, although the women are better educated and getting better and better educated than their husbands, who are still earning more predominantly.
Ida, before you move off, also, let's just go back to those women who are in those single households. It's not addressing also the issue that the over all those years, what has not changed and what could change the picture of their income is changing the minimum wage.
Or the daycare. The point is that since 1950, 50, that there's been an increase of women entering the workforce, and that has been, in fact, an increase for the US GNP, that you get more people going to work. So it's a benefit of the economy. However, men's wages have been pretty much not gone up much since 1971, since the Nixon recession. So that what has happened is not that the population has benefited or that the children has benefited by this increase in GNP. It's only that both people have to go out to work, and children have been left with less and less provisions to look after them.
Professor Perry, do you want to pile on and tell us what you think is wrong with this
sure.
study,
I mean,
or
I would
tell us
echo
what you
what-
think is important in this study?
I agree with what my fellow panelists have said, and I would just add that in the midst of having all these conversations about having it all and leaning in, we're at a moment where in popular culture we're actually having a disproportionate focus on those elite women in usually in dual income households, and a very minimal focus on the reality for the majority of working class and poor women, and that group is growing significantly in the midst of the economic downturn. So I would say that part of what our response ought to be, in addition to offering this sort of critical engagement with what the study actually says, but what does this demand of us? What kind of policy responses ought we request? What kind of priorities ought we put forth with respect to questions of gender equity? Because I definitely think the conversations that are happening in the public are not about the majority of the population that has been of this 40%.
So what kind of policy questions, Professor Perry, do you think this does raise? Professor Morton mentioned minimum wage, and I think Professor Susser added daycare. And so what else is it for you?
Minimum wage daycare, I'd agree with. Also, addressing the problem of mass incarceration, which certainly has an impact in many communities on concentrated poverty, and particularly the added burden upon women. I think trying to develop policies that actually facilitate the reestablishment of extended family networks. We actually have federal housing policy that makes extended family networks difficult, in part because of the kinds of ways in which people who have been formerly incarcerated are put out of the household. The recent efforts to actually prevent people who have been formerly incarcerated from earning any kind of benefits. These kinds of things have a significant impact on communities where there's a concentrated poverty, where there's often single mothers. So I'd say a sort of comprehensive response to poor communities will facilitate caring for children.
Professor Morton, go ahead.
Yes, I just want to say, along with Professor Perry's point, that nowhere in here do we hear about the survivors of violence, both family and domestic violence. 8 million jobs, 8 million work days, 32,000 full-time jobs were not observed in a year because of violence in the home. So we're not even addressing that problem. So these women are being forced into these low-wage jobs and can't even maintain those.
Professor Susser, do we also learn from this that marriage is becoming more of an educated population and higher income population institution?
Absolutely. Partly because, as I said, the men's wages, especially in the lower incomes, have been stagnant. And they cannot, with the rising rents and the rising cost of living, support a household. So, you know, when you're talking about young women having babies and there's the levels of unemployment that there are among young men, it's not very possible for them to rely on a husband. And then when you find that the whole welfare to work laws that were brought in the late 1980s, they were supposed to be combined federally with daycare. But I did a study in New York City, and we were hundreds of thousands of slots short of what we needed, not just for middle-income women who need daycare, but for poor women so that they could go to work, or for even their partners to work.
Professor Perry, why wouldn't the stagnating male wages encourage more dual-parent family formation, because the kids need the income of both, and the men and the women who are the parents would more need each other to fill in the income gaps?
Right. Well, I think there's a number of issues. And one of the things is that it is incredibly stressful. I mean, we know that marriage is a challenging institution in this culture, period. And when you add poverty, and when you add the previously mentioned reality of domestic violence, in addition to the stresses involved in parenthood, and given how many men are actually out of work or underemployed, that you may have a scenario where there's one person working where there might be another adult in the household, but there's really a question as to whether or not that other adult in the household becomes more of a cost or benefit. I mean, one of the things that that one body of research has shown is that oftentimes when there has been sort of marriage solution or marriage promotion legislation put in place, is that it really is not an effective solution because of the unemployment and underemployment in the communities where they say, well, if two people were in the household and married, it would be a better economic situation. In point of fact, that's often not the case.
But most of the marriage laws, which people talk about in talking about the need for gay marriage, have been put in for people who pay taxes, high taxes. And I mean, so not they don't pay high taxes, they get high tax reductions.
Yes.
So that, like, if you're earning very little, like the young women they talk about in this study, young single women are earning like $17,000 a year, $17,400. They're not going to benefit from any of these tax advantages of marriage, which people talk about all the time, or from health insurance, which they're not going to get from the. So a lot of the advantages
so there's
of
another set
marriage.
of public policies that might need to be addressed.
Yes, yes.
And one of the stats from the study, the share of never married mothers among all single mothers has increased from 4% in 1960 to 44% in 2011. Professor Perry?
You know, I think that's another statistic that has two different ways of interpreting it. I mean, on the one hand, it is, I do think that there is a social benefit to women no longer feeling as though they have to be married. And I do think that some of the change is a function of that, in addition to the other economic challenges that have been discussed. And so, you know, it would be interesting to unpack that further and to think and to do more research on why it is that women are not getting married. I think a significant portion, there's a portion that don't get married because they don't want to, and then another portion where it doesn't seem as though it would be an actual advantage to be married.
And Professor Morton, is it a sign of progress at the upper income levels that we're now at a point where, I'm sorry, what was the number? Was it 25% of, what's the percentage of households, married households, where the woman makes more than the man?
About 23.
About 23. So in that range, that's so much more than it was a generation ago.
That may be, and that may be progress in the part of that particular class of women. So I think that this is certainly a story of class. And what concerns me more is not the story of their progress, but the widening disparity between that class and the other, the class of single mothers.
I think
and these women that we're talking about.
It's also misleading.
It's very
because,
misleading.
like, it used to be 95% of men in dual households earned more than their wives, and now it's 75%. But together, they're also not making what they used to make. Like that 95% of men were making enough to support the mother and child at home if they felt like it. And now the 75% with a dual income, they have to have dual income to make that. And the other thing that's very misleading is that even for the uppers, the women with the least equality with men, financiers, physicians, the top level jobs, they have a gap. They're like still only making something like 70% of what men make.
And what do you think is the chicken and the egg in that story? Did employers see the drive of women to get into the workforce because they wanted to be in the workforce, starting sort of in the 1970s, and say, aha, so now we don't need to pay women or men a, quote, family wage anymore, or was it something else?
Well, what happened in 1979 when this neoliberal, gap between men and between poor and rich started to increase. It started in 79. By 1989, at the end of the Clinton era, it was quite a lot larger, and now it's like this. And that is really the reason, not just the women's movement, why women are in the workforce. And the value of public assistance has dropped. Just the way the value of a man's wage has dropped, also the value of public assistance it doesn't provide you with what it used to provide. So it all ends. Poverty is getting even harder. So I don't really think that me as a feminist, or any of us as feminists, we're talking about women having to go to work in order to maintain, being on the treadmill to maintain the same house.
And Professor Perry, the disproportionate impact on Black and Latino women in these numbers is also very, very clear. I guess there's no news there, same as it ever was, or is there some news?
No, I think it's same as it ever was. I mean, the only thing that is perhaps exacerbating it at this point is that the education gap between, in particular between Black boys and Black girls, or Black men and Black women, is probably heightening some of the disparity in terms of
Black and Latino
rates of marriage.
Black
and
girls are actually doing better.
Black girls are doing significantly better and more likely to graduate from high school and college and the like. So,
and Professor Barone, if I could interject a biographical question to conclude. I read that you were once in a more high-flying lifestyle, and then you were very sick for a while. And that kind of changed your perspective on focusing on these things. Tell us about that, and do you think everybody needs a sort of near catastrophe to care?
Well, I hope that everybody doesn't need a near catastrophe to realize. For me, facing that catastrophe was a life-changing experience. And I wanted to be able to come back and to share with other women that as long as they had possession of themselves, they could change their lives. But they cannot do that without some kind of a support system. I was very fortunate to have a family that gave me that support, but not everybody is, and not everybody's family who wants to give them that support can. So we have an obligation as a society, if we truly are going to be a civil society, then to look at this population, our society across the board, and say, what should we do to change that future so that this abject poverty and this disparity that is growing every day in a city as rich as New York City.
Well, thank you all very much for giving us a critical and deeper look into that Pew study that generated some headlines that most people probably had seen before. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, the Human Rights Watch Film Festival. The annual Human Rights Watch Film Festival is underway through June 23rd here in New York, co-sponsored by the IFC Center and the Film Society of Lincoln Center. It's a chance to look deeply into the lives of others and to pause and take stock. Today we get a glimpse of 3 films and meet the directors who are trying to make a difference. Let's begin with the film Deep South, about the HIV/AIDS epidemic that's ravaging some poor communities here in the U.S. Let's watch the trailer.
Some say that homosexuality is not a sin. It is. AIDS is God's curse to homosexual life.
Some of you will like what I have to say, and some of you probably won't. But I'm going to give you my opinion, and I'll try to be as objective as I can.
People usually don't get to tell their story at home. And people need to tell their story.
I leave so much because it's something that's bothering me or haunting me. And I'm steadily trying to run from it.
You put your life on hold for other folks, and you ain't living your life. So it's time for Josh to live Josh's life.
I'm not very close to a lot of people because I think, like maybe I'm contaminated.
You're not contaminated, baby. Everybody else around you is contaminated.
We don't have high-paid lobbyists. We don't have a lot of money. Here are some of the things we do have. The most people living with HIV and AIDS, the most poverty, the most sexually transmitted infections, the most people without health insurance, the most vulnerable populations, the fastest growing epidemic, the least access to health care, the highest mortality rates, and the least resources to deal with this crisis.
Joining us is Lisa Biagiotti, the director of Deep South, and Monica Johnson, who is featured in the film. Johnson is the president and CEO of Heroes, an HIV/AIDS advocacy organization in Caldwell Parish, Louisiana, population 10,000. Good to have both of you here. Hi.
Hi.
Lisa, I get a sense of kind of going back to maybe circa 1980s New York, when it was hard to get people even to start talking about the disease and acknowledging the extent of the problem. Is that the right analogy, and is it right to say, well, that's how far behind they are in the South?
I would say yes and no, and I actually would probably say that the South is more of the future than it is far behind. But in terms of HIV and AIDS, you know, when you look at the statistics and you look at the numbers, you know, HIV, AIDS being one of the leading causes of death among African American women, 50% higher rates of infection. And you know, you kind of expect to go down to the South and see some kind of sense of urgency in the South, that people, some kind of alarm. You know, you expect people to be marching on Montgomery and doing, you know, these kinds of things, just like the HIV activism of the urban areas in New York, you know, of the 80s and 90s. And you know, it's like when I went down and I've driven like 13,000 miles and interviewed 400 people, and I've had to overturn and really unlearn everything that I thought that I knew about this disease. It's so complicated. It intersects so many social issues. Where I find high rates of HIV, I find high rates of poverty, incarceration, teen pregnancy rates, STDs, unemployment, no insurance. So I mean, it goes on, and I think what we're looking at
and
is—
those things are the same as in New York, aren't they?
They are. I mean, it's increasingly, even in New York, become a disease of poverty as well, or a disease of the marginalized. So whether you're marginalized by your sexuality, you're marginalized by your socioeconomic background. And so, yeah, I found that as I went across the South.
So before we bring Monica in, why did you focus on that region of the country? What's different there that's important to this film?
It's HIV, AIDS in the South is certainly not new. I think it's a story that the media never really told. Or, you know, there's this myth that the face of AIDS has actually changed. It hasn't. We just told one story, which is an amazing, great story. It's just not the only story. And I think 30 years into an epidemic that we all want to believe is over, you know, seeing the reality and seeing the statistics and all the trending data is troublesome and alarming. It's really disruptive.
Monica, tell us about where you live and the presence of HIV/AIDS in the community.
I live in Caldwell Parish, which is 30 miles south of Monroe, Louisiana, which is about 5 hours from New Orleans. And it's a rural area. The total population in my parish is about 10,000. Total population within the region is probably maybe about 200,000. And we have, per capita, we have the highest rate of HIV in the state. But because it's a rural area, they focus, most of the funding that comes into the state goes to New Orleans and Baton Rouge, because that's where they have the most cases based on the concentration.
So what are some of the reactions that you've gotten from people in the area who've seen the film, or have they?
They have. We've had about 40 film screenings, about 25 of them in the rural South. Organizations who have just heard about the film just call me up and ask me to come down and present it. And you know, as someone who's not from the South, as a northerner, you know, coming down and telling these very difficult and complicated stories, you know, I was a little nervous, but everywhere we go, people stand up and they say, you know, that is my life. This is, you know, my reality. I hear my voice in the subjects of the film. You know, what can we do? How do we talk about this? So it's really opened up a lot of conversations on a very local level, which is, you know, and people in the South call it normal.
And Monica, what do you think is different about living with HIV/AIDS in rural Louisiana from somewhere like New York City? Anything qualitatively?
Oh, I would say there's a lot, because I've actually contemplated a lot of times moving, but if I left, every time I think I've got my nerve up, one of my clients will call and say, well, when are we doing the retreat? Have we found the money yet? Which we haven't. And I feel like I have to go back. We don't have an infectious disease doc where I live. We don't have all of the extra services. We have the bare minimum where I live. We've never had an HIV/AIDS doc in my region, and this is 29 years plus for me.
An HIV/AIDS doctor? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
You've never had one in the region?
Not.
And why is that? Is that a failure of public policy? Is that just people who are specialists in HIV would rather live here in San Francisco than there, or what is it?
I don't have the answer because, I can't get mad with, one of my rules is I don't get mad about people and their things. And if I'm a doctor, I can live wherever I want to live. And, and if I was in that position, I probably wouldn't want to go there either.
Yeah.
But for the 1,200 people that are there living with HIV.
So Lisa, what do you hope comes from the film?
I hope it starts conversations about a very tired topic, but a very pressing topic. And I often think you could replace the HIV with other social issues in the South. I think, we really are looking at a region in crisis. So you could take out HIV, plug in something else, and you're looking at the fragility of systems, the breaking, the crumbling of social infrastructure.
Is there a risk of you as a New Yorker going down there and making this film, looking like you're parachuting in and saying, oh, aren't we sophisticated up in New York, up in the North, and look how backwards they still are in the South? Or is that what you're trying to say?
It's not what I'm trying to say at all. I didn't parachute in. I drove 13,000 miles across the South. I made a dozen trips. I talked to so many people, and as a Northerner coming in with just my notebook and a set of rental car keys, talking to people, the first conversations were very, stiff, and they wouldn't say anything to me, and they wouldn't let me in. But it was just showing up again and again. And then there's this embrace, and Southerners are like, it's like they tell you too much. I feel like sometimes.
Well, thank you both for coming in, and good luck with the film.
Thank you very much.
Also featured in the Human Rights Watch Film Festival, the story of Michael Morton, an innocent man who served nearly 25 years after being wrongly convicted of murdering his wife in front of his infant son. Again, let's watch the trailer.
When they came back with the guilty verdict and the life sentence, I was stunned. It literally knocked the wind out of me. My knees buckled, my butt hit the chair, and had that chair not been there, I'd have hit the floor.
There wasn't really a lot of deliberation. We all felt so strongly that this was justice for Christine and that we were doing the right thing.
When I went to prison, a lot of stuff is immediate. I mean, you can't plan for the future. It's in your face.
There is a lot of evil residing within these walls. I've sat in the day room and I've had men say, I'm innocent, I'm innocent. But with Mike, it was different. When he spoke to me, I'm innocent, I just believe him.
I remember from my childhood receiving letters from my father. I didn't have memories of him outside of the visits to prison. It was like receiving letters from somebody that didn't exist.
With all the bad things that had happened, my wife's murder, my arrest and conviction, my life sentence, the failed appeals, the DNA snafus, all of that didn't do me in. But when I lost him, that's what broke me.
There is an offense report from 11 days after Chris Morton was murdered. And it's a transcript of a conversation about what Eric saw. Coming from Chris's mother, talking about Eric, talking about a monster with red hands, and that person is clearly not Michael Morton, is devastating to the state's case. And they sat on this information for 25 years.
Joining us now, the director of An Unreal Dream, the Michael Morton story, Al Reinert, who is both a journalist and Academy Award-nominated filmmaker. Welcome to our program.
Thanks very much. Glad to be here.
So what's the biggest thing that went wrong that got him wrongly convicted?
Just terrible bad luck in some respects. I mean, like in Michael's case, the prosecutor hid evidence that would have freed him in the first place. He never should have been convicted in the first place. I mean, like there was evidence that was buried for 25 years before it came to light, and that's shameful and horrible, but not unusual, I'm afraid.
What's been the fallout from Michael's story? What's happened to the prosecution? What's happened to credibility?
In Texas, it has had a big effect. I mean, like, and I like to think that the movie has been a small part of that. I mean, like, but in Texas, I mean, like, they just passed, and this is a state with a Tea Party legislature and Rick Perry as governor. Within the last month, that same legislature passed the Michael Morton Act, which imposes penalties for the first time on prosecutors who don't disclose evidence. I mean, like, it's an open file policy. And Barry Scheck, at the screening we had last night, Barry Scheck says it is much better than...
The attorney?
Yes, the head of the Innocence Project, I mean, like, who was instrumental in getting Michael released finally. This is a better law than you have here in New York State. In a Tea Party red state, you know? I mean, the district attorney who fought against DNA testing for 8 years, I mean, like, Michael was finally exonerated because of DNA tests, that the district attorney fought against for 8 years. He lost his reelection, and again, a very red county. I mean, like, in a Republican primary because of that.
Texas may be the most active state, correct me that I'm wrong, in imposing the death penalty.
Absolutely.
Has this made people in Texas rethink the death penalty because mistakes, even in murder trials, can be made?
Absolutely. Michael himself says that he's fortunate that he only got a life sentence as opposed to the death penalty. We hope it's making a difference. I mean, like, the very same legislature that just passed this acknowledgement, by passing this law, they are acknowledging that the system doesn't work well, that the system makes mistakes. And if you carry that thought further, you realize that, well, we could be making mistakes on people that we're executing.
What was it like to make this film?
It was very emotional because it's a very emotional story. I mean, at the time I met Michael, he had only been released from prison about 6 weeks. And he was trying to put his life back together, and that included reuniting with his son. I mean, like, at the time that Christine Morton, Michael's wife, was murdered, they had a son together named Eric, who was 3 years old, who witnessed the murder. And then grows up, I mean, because Michael is then convicted of this murder and sent to prison, and Eric grows up then thinking that his father murdered his mother, and is off in prison. He only visits him twice a year, to where it's 25 years later that Eric himself finds out that, oh, Daddy did not kill Mommy, and watching and I hope helping see that reunion is, for me, the heart of the movie. I mean, the most emotional part of the movie is the story of this father and this son across 25 years. And in the course of making the movie, we came to know both of those people and saw that relationship heal itself. And that's very moving.
Sometimes the regular media doesn't cover the criminal justice system as closely as it might. Do you think that's a gap that documentary film can or needs to fill?
I think documentaries have changed the criminal justice system, and it's not just ours. I mean, like, there's the Central Park 5 film, there's the HBO series on the Memphis 3, to where what we are discovering is that there are a lot of men and women in prison that don't deserve to be there. And it's documentary films more than anything that is bringing these stories to light.
Well, Al Reiner, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
We leave a veteran filmmaker for a film by a first-time director with a work at the Human Rights Watch Film Festival, Tall as the Baobab Tree. It looks at child marriage in a small village in Senegal. One more time, let's watch the trailer.
Iya. ɓayri mawni sellani aba nayɗi beele mbawaɗi ayin
debbo tan gayno nayɗi
sa yaadi mayri debbo heddo wonko jiɗanmi ɗum so inchallah wonko jiɗanmi ɗum
anndi min miɗo yawno naat dewgal kono ƴeew ɗum ustañum hay ndega miɗo dokala gueɗam fof tubabu wi ko lamdogal doktoto ujunnaje maɓɓe sappo ɗe geeji kala neɗɗo wuurata omo ɗum ñaama miɗ ɗum daña miɗ ɗum ñaama yo assay cosaan paamon cosaan
A glimpse of Tall as the Baobab Tree from first-time director Jeremy Teicher, who joined us via Skype from Brasilia, Brazil. Can you hear me? Hello from New York.
Hello.
Was there a specific incident that inspired you to make this film?
It was actually several years of building a relationship that led to this film. I first went to Senegal when I was in university, my junior year, so I was 19 years old. And I had no real prior knowledge of child marriage or really anything for that matter to do with development in West Africa. But then when I went to Senegal, I met a group of kids my own age who were the very first from their family to ever go to school. And over the course of a couple of years, we made a documentary together and then ended up making this feature film together.
Why did you choose to make a feature film that is fiction as opposed to tell the story through a documentary?
For us, and when I say us, I mean myself and then this group of students who I collaborated with and whose real stories and experiences inform the film, we really wanted to try to capture the emotions of what it's like to grow up living between the modern world of education and school and then the traditional world of this rural village where you do practices like early marriage. And it's a really interesting position that the young generation is in of having to sort of balance the two. So we wanted to try to convey to an audience what that subjectively feels like, what it's like to go to school and come home and feel like an outsider at school, but then also an outsider at home, and how there's actually a lot of different factors when you're talking about a problem like early marriage, for instance, that aren't so black and white. So we felt that fiction was really the best way to sort of just capture this period of time in the village.
How early is early marriage in the village you tell the story about in real life? How young are the girls being married off?
It varies, but typically it's early teenage years. So sometimes, and sometimes a bit younger. So often girls will start school and then get pulled out when they're 11, 12, 13 to be put into marriages.
And when you say you could tell a story in fiction that isn't all black and white, what's an example of one of the shades of gray in this story?
Well, for instance, when we look at the father in the film and you see that he wants his daughters to go to school, he recognizes that as the best path for development for his family and for the village. But then when he feels like his back is to the wall and he has to provide financially for his family, he turns to the village elder for support, and then the village elder recommends a marriage. So when we say gray area, what I mean by that and what the film conveys is that a lot of times when you think about something like forced early marriage, you react, you think, how could anyone ever do that to their children? But what we see is nobody's really evil in this situation that we explore in the film. It's just people are trying to do what they think is best for their families, even if that doesn't fit in with what we know in modern society is the best way forward for development. So we want to look at why this decision is being made to marry off young girls, but not from a place of judging people, but from a place of compassion and understanding. and knowing why girls are still today being married instead of being sent to school. I think that's a really interesting and powerful perspective, and important if we want to make meaningful progress.
We're out of time, but quickly, briefly, has this film been shown in the village you depict?
Absolutely. We had a big screening and everyone came out. We projected it against a sheet on a wall at nightfall. And what was the most touching to me was the village elders afterwards said that they were so glad this film exists and this film was made because they know how fast their culture is changing. Whereas 15 years ago, no one from this village had ever been to school. There are now hundreds of kids going to school. So the village also, as we see it in the film, there's new construction being done. So these traditional villages are slowly melting away into modern cities. So the film exists as this cultural document that shows what life was like sort of at the crossroads between the old and the new world. So that's what I was really proud of that.
And you should be proud that this is the film that they chose to close the Human Rights Watch Film Festival on Sunday. Jeremy, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's our program for this week. We debut a new show each Wednesday evening at 7:30. Next week, a special report from the 2013 Pop Tech Conference taking place in Brooklyn this coming Monday, June 24th. It's entitled The City Resilient, about the strengths and limitations of New Yorkers in the face of all kinds of rising tides. And tune into my daily radio show, WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Tomorrow, Emily Yaffe, who writes the Dear Prudence Advice column for Slate. Till then, I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.